Harold?
Howdy.
Hey, how are you?
Oh, busy, busy, busy.
Well, that's good to hear.
No,
Are you home or are you traveling?
no. Well, I'm home, but I've been working out of the synagogue about 30% of the time while we upgrade the security system.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. What all are you doing?
Oh, we're putting in a brand new system.
Oh, really? Wow,
Yeah.
that's a lot of work.
Yeah. Well, I'm not doing it.
No, I know, but you got a contractor, I'm sure, that's doing it.
Yep.
It takes a lot of supervision.
Yeah. The lead foreman is doing a really good job.
Uh-huh. What are you putting in a bunch of cameras and monitoring equipment and
Uh-huh.
well, you're smart.
Well, we've had the grant money for 3 years.
Oh, really? It's a
Finally-
grant?
Yeah, we finally got around to doing this.
Is there a time period on which you have to act on a grant or
Yeah,
you,
if we didn't do it by this year, we'd lose the money.
yeah, you don't want to do that?
No,
Does that mean it has to have certain characteristics?
it has to be what we wrote meet what we wrote the grant for. We can't change what we want to do.
Hmm.
There's a little bit of latitude, but basically, if we said this is what we want to do, please give us money. That's what we got to do.
Now, who's providing the grant?
Um,
Is it a government grant?
it's a government grant.
Ah, okay. So those are pretty restrictive.
Yep.
Yeah, you gotta, whatever you outline, you gotta do precisely, not a lot of latitude.
Uh huh.
How long will that take?
Um. Hmm. It was supposed to take 2 days,
It never does.
and it's been 2 days, 3 days per week for the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, yeah. Not
So
surprised.
yeah.
Not surprised. I don't know who makes the money on those, but when you get something like that, that it's like you say, it's supposed to take 2 days and it takes a lot longer. That's somebody bid the job wrong, or they just don't have the right people doing it, and what have you.
Hmm. Never know.
Yeah,
It's a Harold and a John. Hey guys.
yeah.
Guys,
Boy, I haven't seen y'all south of the mountain in 6 months.
Oh hell, I've been working weekends, my friend. I
Have you
got
really?
yeah, I had to let a guy go about a month ago, and then I've got my chief operator. She's leaving for maternity leave in a couple weeks, and my other operator has got cancer, so
Hmm.
he's there. So they're on days um, because of their appointments and their restrictions. So it leaves me and one other guy to cover the nights and the weekends. So there we are.
You know what, Chris? When I was in the Navy, we had an expression for that. It means you're working port and port. Instead of port and starboard, you're just working all the time.
You got that right. But whatever. I got my one guy who I hoped was going to pass his test a few months ago is going again next week after next, the 28th. So in 2 weeks to take his exam. And if he passes that, then I can go back to my regular schedule programming.
Yeah, good.
What
Yeah,
kind
so
of exam?
the state licensing exam. So to be a water operator, to operate a drinking water plant or even a wastewater plant, you have to have a license from the state. So yeah. So there's an exam you have to take.
Is it a practical type or just a written type, or
Just
practical and written?
it's all multiple guess. Just so there's a bunch of trivia questions on rules and regulations and safety and all that kind of stuff, and then a big chunk of it's math to know how to do the dosing and to calculate flows and all that kind of stuff. So it's really it's not terribly difficult if you remember any of your algebra from high school. It's not so bad. So all the all the people who said I'll never do all that algebra again. It's like, well, I do it every day. So
Yeah. Well, good luck. It's
thanks.
when do you start all of this weekend?
Oh no, I've been doing it for the last few months.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you
And
said somebody else was leaving for pregnancy leave.
yeah. Maternity leave is on the 28th, I think, or I hear sometime next week when she's going out. Depends on due dates and whether they're going to induce her and all that kind of stuff. So, and if so, when she goes out, and if my other operator doesn't pass his test, that leaves 3 of us, which won't be great.
Yeah.
Don't know how we're going to cover everything with 3 people, so we'll see what happens.
Is a state require a licensed operator present at all times?
If the plant is running, a licensed operator needs to be there.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I
On the drinking water side, that's the law. On the lumpy water side, that's not the case. You just need one licensed operator there that's there 40 hours a week, I think. And the rest of the time can be done by unlicensed staff.
Wow. Well, Rachel, bear with them.
She's been great.
I try.
She does really good when because I roll into the house about 3 o'clock in the morning, and she's real quiet in the morning, so I can sleep. So I appreciate it. And we're cutting into your
Fred.
time, so sorry, Fred.
Oh, no problem. Actually, I wanted to make an announcement, especially Chris, you and Rachel may want to come in to services this Saturday. Rabbi Marco is going to be back. I don't know if you knew or not.
Yeah, I saw it in
the bulletin.
Yep, in the bulletin. I will not
Good,
be able to
okay.
because I'll be at the plant working, but Rachel may come. We talked about it. We're building a deck, so we were outside chatting about it.
Oh, okay. All right. Well,
We've
let's
got
go
some
ahead and-
people that are happy about that and some people that aren't.
So what's the story? Is he just in town or?
Yeah, he's
Or-
visiting his in-laws.
Oh, okay, that's
Yeah.
right.
It's his mother-in-law's birthday, so that they
Oh.
came in for to celebrate that.
Hey, say hello to him for me.
We
I
will.
sure enjoyed him.
Yeah, if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be here. We just
That's
That's
right.
right.
He started this whole thing. Yeah.
And then
Yes.
left.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and begin. The portion, this is a big portion for this coming Shabbat. It's beginning on Deuteronomy chapter 5, because this one includes the 10 Commandments. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah.
Let me mute myself. There we go.
Okay. Yeah. Let me get my copy. Okay. The lead into this is the first 5 verses. It just describes it's really just a repeat of Exodus pretty much, but it describes the scene on Mount Sinai when the 10 Commandments are given. So if somebody wants to read the first 5 verses on chapter 5.
Sure. Moses called all of Israel and said to them, "Hear, O Israel, the decrees and the ordinances that I speak in your ears today. Learn them and be careful to perform them. Hashem our God sealed a covenant with us at Horeb. Not with our forefathers did Hashem seal this covenant, but with us. We who are here, all of us alive today. Face to face did Hashem speak to you on the mountain from amid the fire. I was standing between Hashem and you at that time to relate the word of Hashem to you. For you were afraid of the fire, and you did not ascend the mountain, saying." Then it's the 10 Commandments, I guess.
Yeah, which is kind of ambiguous because it sounds like the people met God face to face. But then he says, no, they backed off. They were afraid to be that close to God. So it was Moses who actually encounters God face to face. and then he transmits this to the people, after that. And then actually verse 6 begins the Ten Commandments. First commandment is really
Fred,
verses. Yeah.
uh, it says where it says here, for you were afraid because of the fire, and you did not
Mhm.
go up into the mountains, he said.
Yeah.
That-
Actually, well, supposedly the mountain was literally on fire when God's presence descended on it. And in fact, actually, and they don't do this in Deuteronomy, but if you read the narrative in Exodus, God tells Moses, nobody, don't so that anybody go up with you on the mountain.
Right.
That was already instructed to begin with. So the people weren't allowed to directly confront God. Only Moses did. And apparently there was this deep darkness, that surrounded the fire. And Moses just walks into the darkness and communes with God while the people all wait outside.
So
Yeah.
two different versions.
Yeah, the versions in Exodus and Deuteronomy are similar, but if you really read the text closely, that they're inconsistent on some minor points.
Oh, they
It's
are.
obviously
Okay. So
yeah,
in the
it's obviously
Hebrew,
two
they are
different.
consistent.
Yeah, on the main theme they are, but if you
Yeah.
really want to nitpick, there are tiny inconsistencies, but between one and another. Okay, so verse 6 and 7 is the first commandment. Somebody wants to read verses 6 and 7.
Sure. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me.
So, and that gets back to the old argument, is this real monotheism or not? Is God saying, I am your God who brought you out of Egypt. Other guys have their gods, but I don't want you, messing with them. I want you to stay with your God. Or is he saying that the other gods don't really exist? You can interpret it either way. And a lot of scholars feel the ancient Hebrews weren't really monotheists totally. They had their God, but they assumed other people had theirs also. And it wasn't until later on, the time of the prophets, that you get this unequivocal kind of statement of a universal God. Um, and then he goes on. The second commandment is verses 8 through 10. Somebody wants to read that.
Sure.
Sure.
You shall make no carved likeness, no image of what is in the heavens above, or what is on the earth below, or what is in the waters beneath the earth. You shall not bow to them, and you shall not worship them.
So basically, this has been the source of a lot of argument over the years, because the meaning seems to be, at least as I read it, you shall not make any statues of anything or pictures of anything to worship. But the later rabbis actually took it a step further. They said, you shall not make any pictures or statues of anything for any purpose whatsoever. And it really affected Jewish culture. I mean, if you look at the ancient Jewish world and medieval world, there are no Jewish painters, there are no Jewish sculptors. If you compare that to the Greeks and Romans, who are really into that stuff. And it really wasn't until the 19th century that you really have any Jewish painters or sculptors. I think, one explanation is this whole thing about building a fence around the Torah. You might paint an innocent picture or make a sculpture of something, and then come to worship it later. So the idea, is that you should build a fence around that commandment. Don't make any image of anything. And Islam really copied Judaism that way. Islam, there are no Islamic painters or Islamic sculptors. They're even more strict about the second commandment than the Jews are. And there's an interesting split in Christianity. If you walk into a Catholic church, you'll often see statues of Jesus or Mary or the apostles or the saints. If you go into a Greek Orthodox church, you have all the icons, all the paintings, which are actually part of the service. But if you walk into a Protestant church, it's mainly Second Commandment stuff. It looks like a synagogue. It's usually just kind of a bare, undecorated kind of space. And that was one of the big arguments between the Catholics and Protestants, in the religious wars that followed the Reformation. The Protestants called the Catholics idolaters because of all the pictures and the statues. But it raises another question, really. assuming you're not worshiping the statue itself, what's the matter? What could be wrong with having a statue or a picture to help you focus while you're praying to God? Which is what a Catholic or a Greek Orthodox worshiper would say.
But I guess the point is that we've never seen God. We don't know what God looks like. So wouldn't we be putting our own interpretation of what God is, and then I don't know, just
Well, actually, that's Maimonides. You practically quoted Maimonides on that. He said, yeah, God is totally incorporeal, and yet God has no body, no human form, and therefore any kind of statue or picture would suggest that he does. And so that's why to him, anything like that would be out. The
So,
interesting thing, though, archaeologists in Israel have found some ancient synagogues that go back to about the 4th or 5th century, and they have these beautiful mosaics. So somebody was cheating. There was at least one guy, there was at least one group of dissident Jews who thought it was okay to have some pictures in their synagogues.
but what were the mosaics of?
They were pictures of people and of animals, they were just really just very colorful, decorative mosaics.
isn't that what Islam does too? Like they're really into the mosaics and the symmetry and the forms. Like in Spain, what's the big synagogue or the big mosque there?
That's the Alhambra.
Yep, thank you. That's the
I've
one.
been to Alhambra. That's a cool place.
It is. Yeah, it used to be a synagogue at one time.
Really?
I don't think I
Hmm.
remember reading that.
I think it was converted, after they'd driven the Jews out. Yeah.
Oh, so it was a synagogue first and then became a mosque.
I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was. I'll have to go back and check
Okay.
it.
My recollection when we were there is that's correct, Fred.
Yeah.
It
And
when,
also, you have to remember one of the first examples of this is, if you remember, is the golden calf, in Exodus.
right.
Moses is up in the mountain for 40 days and nights. The people don't know if he's lost and will ever come back. And they go to Aaron and say, we want you to make us a god to worship. And Aaron takes all the gold and makes this golden calf out of it. But if you read the text very carefully, what he says when they finish making this molten calf is, tomorrow is the feast of the Lord. So, they're not worshiping the golden calf, really. The golden calf is just this physical representation that they want. They're still worshiping the Lord. And it's still an open it's still an open thing. I mean, what would be the harm if you had a statue of Moses in our synagogue?
Yeah,
I mean, nobody would be worshiping the statue, basically.
Yeah.
But but that would be an acceptable decoration. But the traditional rabbis would say no. You
yeah.
can't make any kind of representation of anything. One of the ways that the Muslims got around it, the real art form that the Muslims had in the Middle Ages was calligraphy.
Yeah.
If you look at copies of the Quran or a lot of Arabic writing, even if you don't know a word of Arabic, it's just beautiful to look at. It really is just beautiful calligraphy. And so they kind of got around the second commandment that way and used that as their art. But if you walk into a mosque, there may be decoration, but it will all be abstract geometric designs. It
Mm.
won't be animals or people or anything recognizable as a living thing.
But aren't there like
Let's say hello to the
angels
people.
on top
Hello,
of the ark?
everyone.
Hey, Irene.
Hello.
Hi,
Aren't-
everyone. I just want to say hi.
Aren't there angels on top of the ark?
Yeah, that's a good point. God cheats on his own commandments twice in the Torah. No, he does. When he gives Moses the instructions for building the tabernacle, just what you mentioned is that on top of the ark, build 2 cherubim. And we don't know exactly what they look like, but we know they were some kind of winged creatures, because they sit on opposite ends of the ark facing each other with their wingtips touching, their wings outspread and their wings tip touching.
Oh,
So
I've seen
that's
this
at
movie.
least, yeah. And the other is, in the book of Numbers, I forget what they've done, that Israel has been sinning again, and God sends this plague, which is fiery serpents, and the serpents are biting the people. And God tells Moses, get this pole and put a copper serpent on the top of the pole, kind of a caduceus, really. And everyone who looks at the serpent, will be healed. So there's at least 2 instances in the Torah itself where God violates the second commandment.
But really, are those symbols of God, or are those just symbols of,
Well, I mean, it doesn't, that the rule says you will make no images of any likeness of that which is in the heavens above or in the earth below or in the water beneath the earth. So anything that's alive, you are technically
Yeah.
forbidden from doing it.
Yeah. And again, it also raises the question of what is the definition of idolatry? Some people will say there's no reason, or Catholics will say there's no reason why you can't have a statue of Jesus in your church. You're worshiping the real Jesus, not the statue. The statue is just there, kind of maybe something to focus on, or something as a reminder, or but it's not true idolatry. And the other thing you get when you get to the prophets is that idolatry, they expand the definition of idolatry. Idolatry is not worshiping graven images and statues of gods. It's putting any other value before God. And the phrase the prophets like to use, especially Isaiah, but most of them do it, is worshiping the work of your own hands. So to them, anything that man makes, it cannot be an object of worship. You can respect what people have achieved, you can admire it, but you can't worship it. And idolatry really, in that definition, extends way beyond statues. I know people who worship the Dow Jones average. There are people who worship Clemson football. There's lots
For
of different kinds.
sure.
There are a lot of different
There are a
kinds of
lot of
idolatry.
those.
Yeah, there are a lot of different kinds of idolatry.
Yeah.
And the
And
prophets really expanded, beyond the statues and pictures thing.
Fred, when we were I was at the Uffizi Museum in Florence,
Mhm.
and I was struck by all of the different the paintings and how they made reference to Christ and all of that.
Mhm.
And we were told in the museum that back then that such a large percentage of the population was ignorant that families would commission paintings done and use their family members to portray various characters, say at the Last
Yeah.
Supper.
Yeah.
But it was a way of communicating to these ignorant people that couldn't read and write the story, and that allowed them to repeat it year after year.
Yeah. Yeah. If you go into a place like the Sistine Chapel, in Rome,
Yes.
Michelangelo pretty much painted the whole Bible. If you look at all those panels, practically every major event in the Bible is portrayed somewhere on the ceiling or the walls, of the chapel.
Yeah.
It's really a picture Bible, essentially.
Yeah.
Well, Fred, isn't it true that uh, the Christian artist used a lot of Old Testament imagery?
Oh, yeah, they did. Yeah. Yeah, including some Jewish legends that really are true. They got picked up by the Christians and believed.
Mhm.
For instance, one of the panels, I think I probably mentioned this before, that's in the Sistine Chapel, shows Alexander the Great bowing to the high priest for the Temple of Jerusalem. And this was a story, that when Alexander, had conquered Asia Minor and Syria and Lebanon, he came down through Judea, and the high priest led out a delegation to meet him when he went to Jerusalem. And Alexander got off his horse and bowed down to the high priest. And his general said, you don't bow down to anybody. Why are you bowing to this man? And he says, every night before every battle we fought, I've had a vision where I've seen this man, and we won the battle the next day. And the problem is that Alexander never went anywhere near Jerusalem. There's some pretty accurate history. He went straight down the Mediterranean coast from Lebanon to Egypt. He never stopped in Judea anywhere. There was no fighting there. But apparently the legend just hung on, and Christians believed it, and that led to Michelangelo painting the panel, for the Sistine Chapel.
And there's a lovely representation of Jonah.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, or one of Michelangelo's other really probably the most famous painting of all is the creation of man. You see God extending his hand
Right.
and touching Adam's extended hand. That's probably the iconic picture from the Sistine Chapel. Okay, so moving on to the third commandment, which is a short one. It's just verse 11. Someone wants to read that.
Sure, I will. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain.
Yeah, and there again, it's another a lot of commentary on this one. They're not talking about lying or perjury because that's taken care of by the ninth commandment. But what they're really saying is that the name itself is sacred, and you never use it except in prayer or in taking oaths. And the rabbis were, there's a huge section of the Talmud, concerning who gets to take an oath, and because to the rabbis this was really a religious thing, to utter God's name in public as part of an oath, and then lie, it was a major sin, usually more important than whatever the trial was about. And so there was a real prohibition against ever pronouncing God's name. In fact, Chris, the Bible you have is the Art Scroll. It's an Orthodox translation, and they will not even say Adonai or the Lord. They just say the Hashem, the name. They just get even one more step back from it. But if you look at a modern courtroom, say in America, it's a routine. Witnesses get up and they put their left hand in the Bible and raise their right hand and say, "My testimony will be true, so help me God." And it looks like a religious ritual, but you could imagine the reaction in the modern courtroom if the judge were to look over and say, "By the way, do you believe in God? Or does that black book, or does that black book you're resting your left hand on have any particular significance for you?"
Yeah.
It looks like a religious ritual, but it's not. It's a legal formula. It defines the crime of perjury. Before you do that, if you lie, it's bad, but not necessarily a crime. If you go through that and then lie, then you're open to a charge of perjury. So even though we use Bibles in God's name, it really is not an oath. And I think in the sense that the third commandment is talking about.
So now that you mentioned the whole legal thing, how long do you think they'll be doing that in courts before somebody raises a stink about it and just says we can't do it at all? Like there'll be no mention of God in court.
That's an interesting question. I'm actually surprised nobody has done that so far.
Same.
Yeah, I think there are certain religious sects. I'm not sure about Jehovah's Witnesses. I'd have to check that, but I think they have a ruling against taking oaths.
Yeah, they'll affirm or something else, I think.
Yeah, they say I affirm this, but they don't want to go through the religious ritual because to them it's really taking God's name in vain. And you can make a fairly decent case based on this. The Jews shouldn't be taking those oaths either.
But when you say "so help me God," that is like a prayer.
In a sense, I guess, yeah, you
I
could
mean,
look at it that way.
you're making a commitment. So help me God.
Mhm.
I'm going to tell the
Yeah.
truth.
But since it's really just a legal formula, and basically, you could rewrite the formula so that you didn't say God.
Yeah,
You could, you could say, "I affirm on penalty of perjury that my
sure.
testimony will be true," and that would be that would leave God out of it. I'm surprised somebody
Don't let
hasn't come up with
anybody
that
know
yet.
that, Fred.
What?
Don't let anybody hear you say that.
No, I didn't know that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's and there's a huge body of law in the Talmud about who's allowed to take an oath. If someone has been caught lying before, can he be a witness in a subsequent trial? Like if you have two guys who are arguing over who owns a coat or some article of clothing, and you don't want to really swear them in if you can help it, because what if one of the guys lies, and takes God's name in vain? It's what the rabbis call a Hillel Hashem, which means a public defamation of God's name. And compared to that, whoever stole the coat doesn't even matter. It's such a trivial thing compared to the sin of taking God's name that way. So that they really were, the rabbinical courts were instructed to try to settle it by any means you can, rather than making people take an oath should be the absolute last resort. Try to settle it any other way you can other than that.
So is that the way it was done in ancient Israel?
Yeah, when the Sanhedrin sat as a court, and when there were rabbinic courts, they usually tried not to swear people in,
So the
unless maybe there was contradictory testimony from several people, and obviously somebody's not telling the truth, and then you'd probably have to swear them in. But the idea was get all the information you can without forcing people to take oaths, if you can. And then the one that really, the fourth commandment, which causes the Sabbath commandment, and this is one where Exodus and Deuteronomy really go in different directions a little bit. Um, Somebody want to read the 12 through 15 in Deuteronomy, which is
I'll
the
try.
Deuteronomy version. Okay.
Observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. You, your son, or your daughter, your male or female slave, your ox or your ass, or any of your cattle, or the stranger in your settlement, so that your male and female slave may rest as you do.
Okay. But Exodus has a different version, though. So if you turn back to Exodus chapter 20, this commandment in Exodus is chapter 20, verse 9. So,
Verse 9.
somebody want to read
shall-
want to read the Exodus version.
I'll read it. 6 days
Okay.
you shall labor and do all your work. But on the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. You, your son or daughter, your male or female slave, or your cattle, or the stranger who is within your settlements. For in the 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and sea and all that is in them. And he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it.
Okay. Yeah, so basically there are two differences actually. You sort of have to see the Hebrew to appreciate one of them. The one in Deuteronomy starts off with the word shamor, which is keep the Sabbath. The one in Exodus starts off with zachor, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. So there's a little bit of a difference between the two words. There were a bunch of Kabbalistic mystics at Safat in the 16th century, and they had this theory that God actually said both words at once, but people heard them simultaneously. And they wrote a mystical hymn that incorporated that. If you go to services on Friday night, in the Friday night service, you sing a hymn called L'chod Odi, come, let the bride come. And the very first verse of the L'chod Odi, which was written by these guys at Safat, is Shamor v'zachor dibur echad, keep and remember one word. They worked that into the L'chod Odi, hymn that they wrote. But the major difference really is they give two different rationales for the Sabbath. The one in Exodus says, because God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. The one in Deuteronomy says that you're doing it because God brought you out of the land of Egypt. So that's where they really differ. They give two totally different reasons for having a Sabbath. And I'm going to see if I can share the screen here because the rabbis actually later on actually tried to combine those two into the Kiddush that we say on Friday night. I think I have a copy of that if I can show that to you. Let's see. Google search applications. Let's see. Documents. Okay. Well, it, you know, yeah, it's not working. Okay, I'm 1 for 2 on sharing. But
Hey,
anyway, if you
batting
have it,
500 is still pretty
yeah,
good.
right.
Yeah.
If you have a Siddur at home, though, if you want to look up the Friday night Kiddush, and you'll see it has both things. It has because you created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh, and because you brought us out of a land of Egypt, and redeemed us from slavery. Both of those have been incorporated into the Friday night Kiddush. So the rabbis tried to harmonize Exodus and Deuteronomy by putting all that together. Um, the other interesting thing about it is you have to have the Hebrew text to see it, is the word they used for work. There are about 4 different Hebrew words for work in biblical Hebrew, but the one they use here is called malacha. And malacha is only used in conjunction with the Sabbath or holidays. It's not used in any other kind of context. So it's not ordinary work. It really refers to any kind of creative human activity. It doesn't have to be physical work. The reason the rabbis prohibit, driving your car, using your cell phone, using your computer, none of these are work, obviously, in the ordinary sense, but they all represent using the fruits of creative human activity. In a sense, it's a variation of worshiping the work of your own hands. And so the idea is that on the Sabbath, you remember that God created the world, we didn't. And so, as much as you can, you remove from your environment every trace of human achievement, all the cool things that people have done, like cell phones and TVs and computers and cars and money and all that kind of and writing, even all that kind of stuff. None of that is work in the ordinary sense. All of it is malacha in the sense of creative human activity. So really, in this rabbinic interpretation, you can move the furniture around in your house on Shabbat, and that's not really malacha. That's okay. But if you're lying on the couch, going through what you're going to do Monday when you get back to the office in your mind, that's
You are.
malacha.
Yeah.
That's forbidden. So it's not really work in the sense that we often use work. It's a very special kind of concept of work.
Yeah. It sounds like it's directed to take that space of time and focus only on God and what God has done.
Yeah. And again, it's the same basic idea, with the idolatry thing. You can respect and admire, the things that the human mind has created, but you can't worship it. And
Yeah.
on Shabbat, you worship only God. The rest of the week, you can worship your computer and your cell phone and all the other cool stuff, that people have come up with.
What's interesting when going through this is that when Constantine separated Sabbath
Mhm.
for the Christians from what the Jews did,
Mhm.
that I wonder what his rationale was.
Well, basically, that was the Council of Nicaea. You're talking about the
Yeah,
early
yeah,
fourth century.
yeah.
Yeah, where Constantine really tried to get the church organized, for the first time. And the idea was they liked the idea of the Sabbath, but they wanted to kind of distinguish themselves from Judaism, because at that time, Judaism and Christianity hadn't totally broken apart.
No,
A lot of Christians were still Jews, and so the idea was to make the Christian keep the Sabbath, but to distinguish it from the Jewish Sabbath, and so they put it on a separate day. But there is a difference, though, in the way I think the Christian interpretation of the Sabbath evolved, because you don't really see it in reading the Torah because it's not really in the text here. But the later rabbis decided that Sabbath had to be a day of joy. You had to be you're forbidden to not be happy on the Sabbath. That's a rabbinic concept that really isn't in the Torah text. For instance, if somebody has died and you're observing Shiva, the 7 days of mourning, you have to interrupt that and break it off for the Sabbath. Any kind of mourning ritual is forbidden on the Sabbath. And basically you wear your best clothes on the Sabbath. In Europe, where most people were really poor and you could only afford, say, meat once a week, that was your Sabbath meal. You saved the best food, the best of
oh,
everything for that day. but that it had to be the best day of the week in every sense of the word. And I think what happened with the Christians, though, I think they kind of overemphasized the "thou shalt not" part of it. Usually when you think of a Christian Sabbath, you think of the Puritans, like in New England or in England in the 17th century. It's kind of a day of gloom. When when you go to church for 3 or 4 hours and sit through long sermons,
Yeah.
you're not allowed to do anything on that day. You can't go out and eat. You can't do anything. And so I think the Christians tended to overemphasize the "thou shalt not" aspect of it, whereas they didn't emphasize enough the joyful aspect of it. Okay, then going on to the fifth commandment, which is verse 16. You might want to read that verse.
Sure, I will.
Oh.
Honor your father and your mother as the Lord your God commanded you, that your days may be long and that it may go well with you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder, or that's
Well, that's the end of that commandment.
yeah.
It's kind of more interesting in the Hebrew, because the Hebrew word that's used for to honor is kabod. It says kabed at ivcha and imecha, and kabed really means the basic meaning of the root is to be heavy. And we sort of have the same idea in English. We say this is a weighty matter, or his word carries a lot of weight around here. That's sort of the meaning of kabod, in Hebrew. But you could see, you could actually translate that as give weight to your father and your mother. In other words, when you're a teenager, your parents don't know anything and you know everything. And it's only a little, when you get a little bit older that you realize your parents actually knew something when you were growing up. And this is sort of the same thing. To give weight to, you can actually interpret this as give weight to what they're saying. They may know something. Actually, this is one of the examples that the Rabbi Marco, remember, used to give. When two of the commandments in the Torah, tend to go against each other, if there's a conflict between the two. He grew up in a non-observant home, and when he goes to visit his mother, he knows that you're going to get non-kosher food, and so basically you have two commandments. On one side, you have Leviticus, which says you can't eat this stuff. On the other hand, you have Exodus, which says honor your father and mother. Don't embarrass your mother by saying you won't eat her food if you go to her house. And so, and so Matthew decided that Exodus outweighs Leviticus. So he eats at his mother's house.
Creative. If
Yeah.
that was nothing else, he was creative.
He was. Yeah.
One of the things that when we look at this commandment, and I learned this when I was in Japan, is that the Japanese society really honors their parents, and they hold them in a far different position than us Americans do.
Mhm. Yeah.
And
I
they
think
do
that's
that with
right.
their business cards too.
Really?
Yes. If somebody from Japan gives you a business card, you don't go, okay, and shove it on the table or write on it or anything. You grab it with two hands
Yeah.
and then you put it down beside you at the table. And if there's multiple people, you put it down in the order that they're sitting at the table. And you
Oh.
never just take a card and just say, thank you very much.
Well, I wonder if the level they hold their parents has to go with, weren't they ancestor worshipers for like most of their history?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Some religions, actually, your parents are really on a level with God. Yeah.
right.
You do worship your ancestors. Yeah. Well, on to the next commandment, which is verse 17. Someone wants to read that.
I got that one.
Okay.
You shall not kill, and you shall not commit adultery, and you shall not steal, and you
Oh,
shall
no,
not.
there's only one.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was trucking along. But
One commandment at a time.
okay, yeah. So, but
Well,
isn't really
17, even in the JD,
Uh-huh.
in the JPS, list all four of them before you get to 18.
Sure, sure, sure.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of the Hebrew texts here don't have verse markings for that, and I'm not sure why. But like in the one I'm using, which is uh, it's the old Hertz Chumash that we used to use at Beth Israel. It just doesn't have, it doesn't have any verse markings for the Ten
At all.
Commandments.
Okay.
I'm not really sure where that tradition came from. But thou shalt not kill or murder
Murder. Yeah.
is a separate commandment. And actually, the distinction is really important because the Hebrew word is ratzah, and ratzah usually there are other words to kill. There's two other that are much more common, hamit and harag, both mean to kill. But ratzah really means to murder. And there's really a difference because if you and some people really translate it as thou shalt not kill, and they have the idea that it really means no killing of any kind for any reason. So they won't serve it in the army. They're conscientious objectors. They're against capital punishment. They're against abortion. Some of them, if you take Gandhi's stance on that, will not even defend themselves in self-defense. Whereas all of these things, as we look at murder as unauthorized killing. So, if you're saying you shall not murder, it means you shall not kill in an unauthorized way. You are allowed to kill if you're a soldier in battle. You're allowed you're allowed to do capital punishment. You're allowed to kill in self-defense. Abortion is kind of up in the air because, it depends whether you think a fetus is a person, or not, in the sense that an adult is. But there
Well, what
are a
about
lot of
animals? I mean, it doesn't say you shall not murder another person. It just says you shall not murder.
Yeah.
Or
But
kill,
again,
if you want to use the
yeah,
other
yeah.
interpretation.
Well, if you use kill, you could very easily interpret it as meaning animals. It
But we
doesn't say you shall not kill your neighbor. It just says you shall not kill,
but
and
we
so
have
you could
this
extend that. Yeah.
but we have this whole thing about the temple and the sacrifices. And then we also have this whole thing on like how to kill animals. So it's like if
Yeah.
why would we have all that if that's what it meant?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you can tell, and also the Torah gives the death penalty for various offenses. And God, commands the Israelites to go to war with various people. So obviously, in the context of the Torah, it's thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not kill in an unauthorized way. The society can authorize you to kill in certain situations. But there are people, Gandhi was probably the best example, or the people I think probably take it to the most extreme. There's a sect in India called the Jains, and they really believe that you shall not kill any living thing at all. I mean, they will not swat a fly, literally, or squash a bug. I mean, every living thing is sacred, and you don't kill anything for any reason whatsoever. So that would be the most extreme kind of interpretation of that.
So they must be vegetarians.
They are, yeah, they're vegans because you don't kill any living creature for any reason. But clearly, if you look at the overall context of the Torah, where you're commanded to go to war in certain circumstances, where you have the death penalty, clearly they mean murder, not killing, as a broad concept. Okay. Um, Somebody want to read the next the rest of the commandments because they kind of don't need much commentary.
Sure.
Oh,
It says, You shall not
okay.
commit adultery, and you shall not steal, and you shall not bear vain witness against your fellow man, and you shall not covet your fellow man's wife, and you shall not desire your fellow man's house, his field, or his male servant, or his slave girl, his ox, or his donkey, or anything that your fellow man has.
Yeah. Yeah, the no adultery and no theft are, kind of self-explanatory. They don't really need much commentary. But then the ninth commandment, which is you shall not bear false witness, again, that's what we would call perjury. And so if you compare that with the third commandment, don't take God's name in vain, what they really seem to be saying is don't take any oath, even if you're going to tell the truth. Commandment number 9 covers lying, but you don't want to take oaths even if you're telling the truth that there's some way to get around it, to resolve the issue some other way. Just don't use God's name at all except in prayer, except in very rare circumstances. The 10th commandment is kind of interesting because it's really different than all the other nines. Because the other nines are all thou shalt do this or thou shalt not do that. This is not really doing anything. This is coveting. And you could really ask, what's wrong with coveting if you don't do anything about it? And the rabbinic commentary, most of the rabbis felt that this is another example of building a fence around the Torah. Because if you covet your neighbor's wife or his house or his money or whatever, that might lead you to breaking all the other commandments. In order to get that, you might kill, you might steal, you might lie, you might commit adultery. And so, coveting is a way to keep you away from all this. It's a fence, really. Because you think about it, all these, what about coveting non-material things? What if you covet your neighbor's intelligence or his athletic ability or his musical talent? Those are things that you can't take from him. Is there anything wrong with coveting that? All the things of the commandment lists, basically are material things that you could conceivably take away from your neighbor. But in doing that, you'd probably be breaking several of the other commandments.
I have to think about that one.
Yeah. So if you had a note on somebody's house and you foreclosed on it, would that be considered coveting?
I don't think so, because I think coveting, the implication of the word usually is that you're wanting something that you have no legal right to.
Right.
If you're saying you have a note on their house and that's a legal right to the house, the note is now paid. Yeah, it's
Coveting
basically,
would be forcefully removing against.
yeah, taking something. Now, again, you might be able to talk your neighbor out of giving you one of his ox or his ass or whatever it is. So I suppose that there would be ways to get around that without committing any crime. So coveting really is kind of a fine line. Some people would say coveting is not a sin if you have no intention to do anything about it. You could really want your neighbor's wife, but as long as you control yourself and don't come on to her, then it's okay. You haven't committed any sin.
So they're making a distinction between like wanting something out of jealousy, or just want versus like admiring something. Is that the distinction we're making?
Well, yeah, my interpretation really is that they assume that coveting means that you want to get it by some way other than legally getting it. In other words, if you want your neighbor's house, make him an offer for it.
Mhm.
Bid on it see if he wants to sell it. But I think which would be perfectly legal and perfectly moral. So I think coveting, when they say don't covet it, to me at least, they're saying, don't try to get it in ways that are not moral or
Yeah.
not legal.
The way I read some of this is it means like, and use the ox and donkey as an example. It means, you're going in and you're taking that person's ox or donkey without his permission.
Yeah, that's the way I would interpret it. Because there really is nothing wrong with wanting anything that
Yeah,
your neighbor has, as long as you're not going to break into the other commandments in order to get it,
sure.
essentially. I think what the rabbis are saying is, it's better not to want it in the first place, because that keeps you an extra step away, from breaking any of the other commandments. But of course, the argument against that is that how can you keep from coveting something if you really want it?
Mhm.
Because coveting is a mental thing, and it's hard. How can you not want something that you really want?
Well, have the rabbis dealt with that more from the actual act versus what someone thinks about it?
Yeah. Well, what most of them said was it's just an example of building a fence around the law.
Mhm.
Not coveting it, not wanting it is one way of keeping you from doing anything bad in order to get it. But it's but it in a sense it goes against a lot of other rabbinic teachings though, Because one of the things that Judaism always emphasizes, and really in contrast to Christianity, is that action is more important than faith. Whereas Christianity, particularly some of the Protestant denominations, really say faith comes first. In Christian terms, you'd say faith is more important than works.
Sins known and unknown.
Right. But what the rabbis really believed was, you can be responsible for your actions. And everybody can and should be held responsible for their actions. But how can you really be held responsible for your thoughts? I mean, if you don't believe, can you make yourself believe? You really can't. I mean, either you believe or you don't.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people who like to believe but just can't. They just don't. And so the rabbis always emphasized deeds much more than they did faith. The idea really was, believe what you want, but follow the law. We're only going to judge you by your deed. We're not going to get inside your head.
Right.
Think what you want, but just do the right thing. But this, in a sense, is almost a contradiction of that, because they're saying is don't think about getting your neighbor's house. And you can't really control your thoughts.
Isn't that what kind of makes us people, is controlling your thoughts? I mean, having your thoughts but not acting on them, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can't control your thoughts, but you can
Controlling
control your actions.
impulses. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. You don't have to act on those thoughts. If you covet your neighbor's house, you can make him an offer for it. But if he says no, I'm not selling, you're not allowed you're not allowed to do anything illegal or immoral to get him out of the house in order to get it. And you're judged by what you do to get the house, not by wanting to get it, in a sense. Okay. Well, that was a good session. Okay.
Yeah, very much
It
so.
was.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Actually,
Fred.
I should go back. I forgot to mention one thing when we were discussing the Sabbath laws. Both Exodus and Deuteronomy say, you shall not work, your sons nor your daughters, nor your man, your ox or your ass. Nothing, no living creature in your household is allowed to do any work. But yet there is a custom among Orthodox Jews, which to me really violates the spirit of the Sabbath, where they'll hire a Gentile to do things for them on the Sabbath, that they're not allowed to do themselves.
Oh, the Shabbos goy.
Well,
Yeah, the Shabbos
we were
goy
like that
concept.
in the synagogue for a long time when we had the hired ladies who would come in and cook on the Sabbath to feed us the kiddushes if we had an event, we hire people, hire non-Jews.
Yeah. And actually, in my interpretation of that, even your ass or your ox can't work. How can you expect another human being to work?
Right.
So yeah, that whole Shabbos goy thing has always bothered me. I really think it violates the fourth commandment. Even the Orthodox Jews, say it's okay.
Well, they're not a believer of the same God. So you can hire them.
Okay.
Just
Okay.
Fred, when are you going on vacation? It's not next week.
No, I won't be here the Tuesday after next.
Okay, so you'll be with us next Tuesday.
Yeah, we
but
will
not
meet
the
next
following
Tuesday, but not the following Tuesday. Yeah. And let me give you the Torah portion that we'll talk about it next Tuesday. It's I've got it here. It's okay. Yeah, it's Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 4. It begins with Deuteronomy 9:4. And it goes 9:4. Yeah. And it goes through chapter 10, verse 11. So it's from 9:4 to
It
10:11.
begins, Hear, O Israel.
I think that may be
Yes.
part of it. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Today you crossed the Jordan.
Okay. Okay, guys, terrific session. Good to see
Yeah.
you all.
Thank
Yeah.
you. I'll miss you all next week. We're going to be on a cruise headed up into
Oh.
Canada.
Oh,
So
well, have a good trip.
Well,
Wow.
enjoy.
yeah,
Good for
Yeah.
you.
thank you.
oh,
Thank you, Fred.
Okay.
Thanks, Fred.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Fred.
Fred. See you, gang.
See you guys next week.